Your car guy. Today we're doing the front brakes on a 2010 Ford Escape. Had a bad grinding noise. Brake pads worn on the inside of the passenger side right into the brake rotors. So in this case we're going to do front brake pads and rotors. First things first, you want to get the vehicle jacked up and secured with either a jack stand or some other type of a safety device so that it can't fall. The jack is just to lift it, it's not to hold it, so try not to use that. If you don't have an impact wrench, you will want to, before you jack the vehicle up, just break loose the lug nuts. They're a 19 millimeter or a 3/4 inch if you're using SAE sockets, or a 4-way wrench, or just the lug wrench that came with the vehicle. This vehicle actually has a nice boxed frame under it, so I'm going to jack up and put a secure jack stand under it, and then I'm going to remove my 5 lug nuts and take the wheel off. We'll go to that point. Okay, I've got my wheel removed. You will notice I did leave my jack still under the vehicle, even though I have a jack stand supporting it, and that's just kind of a double safety. Few things we need to do. This clip here needs to be removed, and it simply pries out. Then there's going to be a bolt inside here and another one inside here. These are just little caps that you can pry out with your fingers, or if they're really stuck in there, you can grab a screwdriver and just pry those out. Little plastic cap, that's a dust cover. Alright, now inside here is a 7 millimeter Allen. That's where I'm going to use this Allen driver. You can also use an Allen wrench, but it'll go right inside of there. You'll get it down into the bolt. And then if you're looking at my ratchet, I'm going to go clockwise to loosen that up. And I'm going to do that on both the top and the bottom bolts. This will get the brake caliper free. Now we do have to remember, we have to have that clip off before I can actually pull this brake caliper off. I'm going to show you one little trick. Because I'm replacing the brake rotors, there's something I can do to more easily compress the piston in this. So when I put the new brake pads on, there's a piston that's inside here. That piston pushes out. That's what actually activates the brakes. Well, it continues to push out to adjust. In order to compress it, normally I'd take it off and use a brake compressor or a C-clamp to do that. But here, because I'm replacing that brake rotor, I don't like to do this on brake rotors I'm not replacing. I can simply stick a pry bar into the rotor and pull towards me nice and gently. It's going to go slow, and as it pulls out, it'll get a little bit further each time, and I can get another bite and actually compress this piston as far as I need to before I have to take anything else off. This actually makes the disassembly go even easier. Then I can simply pop out my clip here by prying it away, undo my bolts, and then set this out of the way. Alright, now that I have both my upper and lower bolts loosened up, I can simply take the brake caliper and pull it out. Now, I'm going to set it up here just to try to reduce stress on this brake line, and then simply pull towards you on this inner brake pad. It's got some clips that lock it into the brake piston right here, and take it out. Now this side, you can see we were down to where we were just starting to touch the brake rotor. I'm putting brake rotors on both sides. The other side's completely through into the brake rotor. The inside pads tend to wear faster than the outside pad because it's the side with the piston. You can see my outside pad still has significantly more friction material left on it than the inside one does. Now, if you're just doing the brake pads and you haven't gotten into your rotors, you can skip forward in the video to where I start assembling, putting the brake rotor or caliper right back on. But if you're going to change your rotors, what we're going to do, the next step is there are 2 18 millimeter bolt heads here that we're going to take out. Now these can be very stout to get broke loose. An impact gun works good, or something with some leverage, like a long handled 1/2 inch drive ratchet or a breaker bar. And sometimes what will help is to go ahead and get in the car, turn it on, and turn this all the way to the left, which will bring this out and allow us to work on it more easily. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll break these loose. Okay, I've got that wheel turned out. Now I have my nice long breaker bar that I can put on those bolts to pull up on, break them loose. And having a good angle on it actually increases the torque you can apply to it and makes it pretty simple. So we'll just pull these two bolts out. So as we get these bolts out, this will let this bracket, brake caliper mounting bracket, come free, and then we can simply pull that brake rotor right off. So it's not super difficult. Most difficult part is if you don't have enough leverage to break loose these bolts, which shouldn't be an issue if you have long-handled ratchet. So now, because I'm using the brake rotor as part of what's going to hold my brake caliper in place, I'm going to gently let it dangle for just a few minutes while I change out the rotor and this bracket. So by doing that, when I say gently, I'm going to very gently hang that, not just drop it, because that instant impact will take up and could break that brake line. They're pretty stout, but you don't want to risk it. So there's our bracket off, out of the way. Now the brake rotor itself, it may take a tap to break it loose here. You can use either a dead blow hammer or give it a good kick or something like that and pop it loose, just because you've got dirt and maybe some rust that's built up right there. So pop that loose and we'll pull it right off. Took a couple of smacks at it with my trusty dead blow and it popped loose. Simply slide it off. You can see on the back of it here, our wear pattern is actually kind of narrow, and that's because those pads were so worn out. A lot narrower than our front wear pattern, even though they say use the same size brakes. So now we're going to discard that brake rotor and we're going to get the new one. I'm going to get the new one out of the box and then show you what you got to do before you install it. Okay, I have the brake rotor out, and if you'll notice, there's some yellow sticky stuff on it, kind of an oily substance. That's a film they put on there to keep the brake rotors from rusting. What you're going to want to use is some brake cleaner to clean that off, and you'll simply spray these surface areas across here, both front and back, to get the oil off. It's not so important if you get it off in here, because that really won't matter, but this is where our brake pads are going to contact, and if we don't get that off, it can cause some issues with our braking. That oil can get into the brake pads and you can have some problems. So you want to get this clean, use brake cleaner. I've cleaned both sides with my brake cleaner. It's still drying, which doesn't take very long at all. You can see right there as it begins to dry itself off. But now I don't have that oily substance on there. Make sure too, if your hands get greasy, don't touch this surface afterwards. Make sure you grab here or just flat on the outside edge of the rotor to stick it on. And also make sure you don't get any grease on the brake pad material, the friction material, in order to keep it from having problems with the braking. So with this rotor clean, it's simply a matter of setting it in place. You line up your lug studs and simply set it on. Now I'm doing this one-handed, so I'm not quite as adept one-handed as I would be if I was using two, but hey, I couldn't make you a good video. If you do by chance get a little bit of grease on it while you're doing it, just take your brake clean, spray it again while it's up on there. Make sure you don't have any greasy spots. Now we're going to simply put the bracket back into place. Now your bracket, when you look at it, is going to come in from the front with these short stubs hanging over the rotor like that, and then you'll simply get them into place back here and install your bolts. Okay, there we have our bracket back in. We're going to tighten these up, get them fully tightened up or torque to the proper specs, which you can look those up online. It may vary year to year with your vehicle. Generally, you can also go by a bolt size chart, and when they talk about bolt size, they're not talking about the head of the bolt. They're talking about the actual screw shaft of the bolt, like you would see here on these studs. That's what determines the torque, not the size of the bolt head. Those can vary greatly for the same size bolt shaft. So we're going to torque those, and then we're going to put our caliper and pads in. Okay, we're going to take a little bit of the Moly brake lube that came with our brake pads and put it on the back, the steel part of the brake pad. If you'll notice, there's the friction material, here's the backing and the steel. So once we put this on, we just do a thin coating right where we're going to make contact with the caliper, and on this one we're just around where the piston's going to touch it. All this does is it helps to limit vibration, which can cause brake squeal. And so if you don't put it on, it's not the end of the world. You just might get a little bit more noise out of your brakes, and in many cases, even if you don't put it on, you won't have any noise. Okay, outer brake pad will simply set into this bracket just like that. You can see those tabs lined up. The inner brake pad, I've got this sitting up here, has these tangs on it which are going to go into that piston, and you'll have to apply a little bit of force as you shove back. It's good to line it up, grab it with on both sides, with right here on the thumb with your ear, and you can squeeze against that and just pop it in. Of course, I had to set the camera down to pop it in, but there it is in. Now, when we go to put it on, we're going to make sure something don't have a twist in your brake line. If you've rolled this the wrong way, you'll have a twist and a kink, and that can cause the brake line to fail. It's simply a matter now of setting this into place, and you'll notice now I've got a gap between where my bolt is coming out of this ear and where it's going to screw into. That's okay. That's actually normal, because these are a sliding bolt that allow the brakes to adjust. If these are seized and won't move in and out, you'll get uneven brake pad wear. So now we're simply going to screw these back in, tighten them up, and put the dust caps in. Now you don't want to forget to put your outer spring in. This set came with a new one. Now these can seem a little daunting, but they're really not that difficult to install, and I'm going to show you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put so that that tang goes inside that hole with this tang underneath there. Then I'm going to pull it down and get this tang into this hole, and then pry this down around there. It's kind of a pry it under and push up. You may want to use a screwdriver or a pry bar to do this, but it's not that difficult unless you're doing it one-handed. Once it's in, I'll show you how you want to make sure that clip is fully into its latch so it doesn't pop. Okay, I'm going to show you this. I've purposely not got that clip all the way in versus see how that one's sitting down in. When you're at this point, it's as simple as give it a tap and a couple of taps to make sure it's fully seated, and then look how it's snapped in. And that's on. Now, quick reminder, when you're done, because you've compressed that piston all the way back, if you just jump in the vehicle and go to drive, you're not going to have any brakes because we've compressed those pistons away from the caliper. So before you do anything, you're going to go inside and you're going to pump the pedal until it gets hard. What that's going to do is that's going to adjust the brake out fully onto this rotor. The caliper will fully become engaged. You don't want to do this until you have the wheels on. I'm telling you about it now because I don't want you to forget it. The reason why you want to do it when the wheels are on is then the wheel is what holds this rotor in place, and then the caliper will adjust to where it's at. If you do it before, it's not the end of the world, but it's not going to be in the exact spot. So make sure to do that. Now we're simply going to put on our wheel and our lug nuts and torque them to the factory recommended specs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them on tight enough. When I say tight enough, I'm going to snug them up to where I can lower the vehicle. That way with it on the ground, I have something to keep the wheel from turning on me while I put the lug nuts on, or put the torque to the lug nuts, and then we'll be done. Okay, just a few things as we finish up. The wheels are on and they're torqued. We pumped the brake pedal up to get a good firm pedal again, since we had compressed the pistons in the calipers. You'll note a couple of things. I did not give you torque specs. There's a reason why. One is that there can be variations year to year. For your lug nut torque specs, go to your owner's manual or look them up online. The other thing that can happen is occasionally manufacturers, if they find they're having a problem with something, will update torque specs or even change bolts and update torque specs. And so I want you to look those up and make sure that you have the correct torque specs for your vehicle. This is your car guy. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and share, help us grow. And if you have any questions, send me a message and I'll respond as quickly as I can.